Story 1. Orchestrate a significant cost of living crisis so everyone's money can be taken and transferred to the wealthy elites. What will people do? Protest. Story 2. I would have a 200-foot-tall bronze statue of Hank Hill erected in Dallas. I would have a 160-foot-tall bronze statue of Peggy Hill built in Houston. I would have a 120-foot-tall bronze statue of Bobby Hill built in Austin. I would have a 100-foot-tall bronze statue of Ladybird, the dog, built in Dallas next to the bronze Hank Hill statue. I would have a 100-foot-tall bronze statue of Boomhauer built in Fort Worth. I would have a 100-foot-tall bronze statue of Dale Gribble built in Garland. I would have a 100-foot-tall bronze statue of Bill Dotterive built in Beaumont. I would have a 100-foot-tall limestone statue of Joseph Gribble built in San Antonio. I would have an 80-foot-tall limestone statue of Lewin Platter built in Lubbock. I would have 3 80-foot-tall limestone statues of Con, Min, and Connie Suffinusenphone built in Grapevine. I would have an 80-foot-tall limestone statue of Nancy Gribble built in Amarillo. I would have a 60-foot-tall limestone statue of Buck Strickland built in Corpus Christi. I would have a 60-foot-tall limestone statue of Joe Jack built in San Angelo with a plaque that says, Honey. I would have a 4-foot-tall limestone statue of Cotton Hill built in Abilene. I would have an 80-foot-tall limestone statue of John Redcorn built in El Paso. Story 3. After locking up the entire Trump administration and deporting them to the El Salvador prison, I would ban pop-up ads online. Story 4. Focus and solve one problem. Prepare for my funeral as a result of fighting against corruption. Story 5. Tax the churches. Religion has not stayed out of politics, so their special status should be questioned. They should demonstrate that they are genuinely contributing to public benefit, like other nonprofit organizations. We need to stop allowing corporate tax rates to be lower than those for citizens, especially since, due to the Citizens United decision, corporations are considered people as well. Story 6. Deport the previous administration to El Salvador without a trial. I believe they are gang members. Inform Canada and Mexico that the previous administration is no longer in power and that we would like to restore friendly relations. Story 7. Buy an Economics 101 book and read the Constitution. Try to address our significant problems, specifically unaffordable housing and childcare, while also supporting domestic jobs and working conditions. This way, the entirety of the medical, education, and transportation public workforce can stop going on strikes each month. Story 8. Sorry, no power. We only have 7 representatives for the country and 46 representatives for the cantons, so I don't have any power to abuse. Story 9. Gather all the information I am now privileged to know. There is no benefit in implementing anything before understanding all the facts. Story 10. Imprison political representatives who have used their position for insider trading or to enrich themselves at the expense of the public. Story 11. Assuming I arrived through legal means and cannot act without limitations, remove all executive orders currently in effect and return power to the legislative branch. I recognize this could be a destructive action, but I firmly believe the president has accumulated more power than one individual should possess. Continuing to operate within the existing system is leading us down a troubling path. Assuming I arrived through some kind of revolution and I can act freely, gather representatives to form a new constitutional convention to completely redraft the government, inviting representatives from other countries with functional democratic systems and a higher quality of life to provide feedback and suggestions. The current system is not working, plain and simple. We need a new one created from scratch, using the lessons learned from other countries over the past 250 years since the original Constitution was established. I understand this is extreme and drastic, and some may be upset by this, but the truth is, it doesn't matter. This is all hypothetical. I am not a leader, nor do I aspire to be. If I found myself in this situation, I would not be concerned about being a leader tomorrow or even being alive tomorrow. The only priority would be putting the country on the right path. If you are upset by this comment, please take a moment to cool down and respond thoughtfully. I am not attempting to provoke any arguments and am open to hearing all perspectives. Story 12. Institute sweeping socialist changes to essential services like banking, mail, telecommunications, healthcare, housing, and food production and distribution. Institute meritocracy in government bureaucracy using a double-blind method to eliminate biases in race, gender, age, or disability. Enact sweeping reforms of the tax code by eliminating loopholes for the wealthy and removing special treatment of realized capital gains. Classify loans granted based on stock valuations as income and require biannual tax audits for all individuals and corporations with incomes over $250 million. Apply a double-blind method to eliminate biases in race, gender, age, or disability for jury selection, preventing both prosecution and defense from excluding jurors based on those factors. Do the same for sentencing in criminal justice. Juries and trial judges can receive all relevant details, but sentencing will be determined by a judge with only the guilty verdict and severity details of the crime or its victims. They will have no information on the perpetrator's race, age, wealth, gender, family name, or associations. Enact sweeping reforms to law enforcement, clarifying and severely limiting qualified immunity, and establishing an independent department that does not rely on a friendly relationship with law enforcement agencies. This department's role is to review and charge police for actions in uniform that violate the law. Story 13. Implement a tax refund policy for everyone who votes. Consider a $100 credit for each level of government. Next, establish a proportional representation system for elections. Story 14. Ensure liberty and justice for all by arresting and charging every official who denies the rights of the people under the color of law, and by arresting and charging everyone who conspires to intimidate someone from freely enjoying their rights. Story 15. Send a lot of Make America Great Again to their fun camp in El Salvador. What? I thought no due process was perfectly acceptable? Story 16. Have 4 years' worth of Red Bull shipped to the Oval Office immediately. It will involve many late nights and hard work cleaning up the mess the current administration is making. Story 17. Buy a ton of gold. And by that, I mean to create an underground base to store all the gold in a bunker. Once I have enough money, I will convert it to legitimate funds, and then I will have a lot of money. Story 18. Remove all restrictions to build small houses and dense condominium units, and allow for high-density residences in urban centers. The goal would be to reduce housing costs using the free market. I would also end all federal lending, legalize insider trading, and incorporate more private military contractors into the military. I would spend the next tenure of my leadership converting all taxation to land value taxation, privatizing Social Security, and reforming Medicare to either not exist or be closer to Singapore's system of enforced health savings accounts with state-subsidized catastrophic insurance. I would also work with private entities to create several competing algorithmic stablecoins and end the United States dollar. Decriminalize sex work. Shut down the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And end the Federal Reserve. Story 19. I would inform all residential property owners that they can designate one of their properties as their primary residence. All other properties would be subject to a compulsory purchase order and converted into social housing. Tenants would have the option to purchase the property they reside in under a right-to-buy scheme. Residential property ownership would then be limited to one property per owner. Story 20. Find someone who is actually qualified for the job and whom I can trust to take care of the sick, poor, children, and elderly, and make them the leader. Story 21. Abuse the emergency broadcast system to instruct citizens on how to initiate a recall election and maintain a standing veto on all bills until a constitutional amendment establishes 2 term limits for the Senate, 3 terms for the House, and a maximum of 10 years for the Supreme Court. Additionally, provide a palette of pardon forms in case citizens choose to encourage their representatives to comply with the term limit request. Story 22. If I became the leader, I would already be an ineffective politician. The decades of harmful influences from the realm of politics, bureaucracy, indoctrination, and a slight bit of power would make me detached from reality, even if I came from humble beginnings. It is a clear line that has existed for thousands of years and will continue to do so. The bully, the ruler, the wealthy, the aristocrats, and the ungrounded. The lost. I would remain detached. Story 23. Unify the tax code into something simpler, so that people do not need several years of education to understand it. Perhaps a 10% to 20% income tax for everyone, including companies and individuals. No other taxes except tariffs or specific products like alcohol and tobacco. I would also tighten the tax code. Companies and individuals would pay taxes on what they earn in the country, with no loopholes for moving profits outside. Additionally, I would likely initiate a large-scale construction of new residential areas, flooding the market with houses and apartments, built and sold only to individuals who do not own any other land or buildings. Story 24. Abolish inheritance tax and find a way to eliminate state pensions that are passed on to deceased politicians' children. Story 25. Outlaw all opposition to my rule. I am going to be a benevolent dictator and do not need anyone undermining my efforts. Story 26. Wait, do you mean my home country or the country I currently live in? Serious answer. For my home country, appoint highly aggressive individuals as Attorney General, head of the Justice Department, and head of the Federal Trade Commission. In the country I currently reside in, ensure that the entire nation has a robust internet system and consider establishing regulations for better digitization and streamlining of bureaucracy. True answer. Lead both countries simultaneously in a legal manner. Declare them unbreakably bonded nations, united in spirit and various other ways. Encourage the far-right factions in both nations to engage in a fierce conflict while I assert that the only path to the future is to ban homeopathy, build a statue of von Prussian, and then declare a week of beer drinking to celebrate before focusing on dominating the global economic and scientific landscape. Story 27. Make sure loopholes that cause our tax problems are closed. Tax attorneys exploit these loopholes so that corporations and wealthy individuals pay nothing. Make loopholes obsolete. Require Congress and the Senate to prove their understanding of the three branches of government through testing. If they do not pass, they should be removed from office. Remove automatic rifles designed to kill as many people as possible from our streets. In other words, military-grade weapons should be removed from civilians who lack training and psychological testing to demonstrate their ability to handle the responsibility of ownership. When firearms are purchased, a gun safe must be acquired to store them. Require specific magnetic strips of metal to be interwoven into these weapons, allowing law enforcement to use powerful magnets to locate illegal firearms hidden in residences. Hunters do not need semi-automatic rifles to hunt. I am tired of the pretense and the argument that only criminals will possess weapons, especially when there will be a dedicated department focused on legal ownership. Implement tests for parenthood. Young men should receive reversible vasectomies. Once they pass a test proving their readiness to be a father, they can have the vasectomy reversed. In 22 years of teaching, I encountered several pregnant students every year. I sometimes thought I was close to having a year without any pregnancies, but inevitably, I would find out in May or June that it didn't happen. People with disabilities should not be treated as second-class citizens. Story 28. For the United States, elections, implement ranked choice voting. Make voting mandatory with a $20 fine for missing it, but you must physically go to a courthouse to pay, making it very inconvenient. Eliminate hidden money in elections. In fact, eliminate all money in elections. All elections will be financed through tax dollars, with a set amount per person depending on the election. If you cannot properly budget an election, why should I trust you with the country's finances? Congress reforms. Establish term and age limits. Every bill will be voted on within 2 weeks of its arrival. Congress members will receive no more than the minimum legal amount of vacation employers must provide their employees each year. Congress members will be compensated based on a percentage of the federal GDP plus a percentage of their state's GDP each year. This will incentivize them to invest in the prosperity of the United States. Congress members are prohibited from trading stocks while in office or within 2 years after leaving office. No more filibusters. Each individual bill will have an accompanying information pamphlet approved by an unbiased panel. Every person voting on that bill must pass a test proving they have read the pamphlet. Congress members must vote on 85% of the bills, or they will be removed from office in disgrace and barred from running for office due to dereliction of duty. Lobbying is considered election interference and bribery, thus illegal. Supreme Court reforms will be addressed later. Story 29. Kiss the designated hitter and artificial turf goodbye. All weekend games will now be day games. Story 30. I would stop all financial aid to foreign countries and redirect that money to homeless individuals, orphanages, and veterans. I would not allow anyone else into the country until every American is taken care of first. After our people are properly cared for, we can then send aid to others. Story 31. Here in America, I would introduce ranked choice voting so that we are no longer beholden to two parties that do nothing for us. I would eliminate lobbying since it can be considered legal bribery. I would implement term limits in Congress. Additionally, I would support universal health care and establish a department to combat the prevalent misinformation. Story 32. Implement direct democracy. A uniform tax rate for all individuals. Public transportation is free for everyone 24/7. All schools should incorporate 1 hour of mandatory, military-style exercise before the start of the first class, including for younger students. Story 33. Give myself an immediate raise, make my yearly payout a lump sum one-time tax-free payment, and then quit after I receive the payment. Story 34. Terminate half of ineffective nepotism hires in government positions. Dismiss the remainder and recruit capable individuals. Reduce assistance to those who have never worked a day in their life, and establish limits on how long aid is provided before job placement. This was only in the first hour. Story 35. Depending on how dictatorial I can be, many people will have to go on permanent isolated retreats before I can actually get around to fixing the state of our democracy, healthcare, public transportation, and other matters. Story 36. Prepare a contingency plan for when the powerful individuals want me assassinated for my initiatives, such as universal healthcare and ensuring the wealthy pay their taxes. Story 37. High-speed trains provide better public transportation overall. Apartments should not cost more than $750 per month. Any landlord or company charging more will face legal consequences. Additionally, cities are required to build enough housing to ensure that supply is not an issue. Universal health care is essential. Car insurance will be covered by the state. Story 38. Install the National Health Service. Restore political spheres of peace through soft power, and petition Gaijin Entertainment to add the B1B to War Thunder. Story 39. Enshrine freedom of speech into law. Our country is experiencing significant challenges regarding this issue. Sadly, many people do not realize that even if the law is being misused to silence political opponents today, the same laws can be used against them when they are no longer in the majority on a particular issue. Story 40. Play the long game. Work with genuine communists to help them mislead the bourgeoisie by pretending to defend their interests to gain seats in political institutions. Once we have a majority, dismantle the bourgeois state as Lenin planned while encouraging workers and the oppressed to form local councils to collectively decide how their time and labor should be utilized. Story 41. Speech. First, acknowledge the shocking corruption and eroding institutions over many decades due to money in government. Post-World War II military and oil industry crimes, dictator support, and extortion by federal agencies over multiple administrations have contributed to this situation. This results in a superficial response to the outrage of certain groups, characterized by conspiracy theories and violent, immoral postures. Second, outline a practical set of actions that integrate transparency and oversight by credible professionals. The organization Represent.us provides a template that addresses the core of this reform with a bipartisan, proven, effective tactical plan. This plan has resulted in empowering state-level actions and laws, which number around 183. Finally, highlight the lack of qualifications in the current executive administration, indicating that we will not benefit from such incompetence, especially when contrasted with what we are capable of achieving. Story 42. Change politicians' income. Require public disclosure of any intent to invest before making the investment. Tie their actual salary to performance not just during their term, but also afterwards. This formula would need to pay very well, assuming the country performs well, to attract talent. Currently, About 98% of individuals entering politics seem more focused on personal gain than the welfare of the country. Story 43. Reform the judicial system and implement harsher sentences. No segregation or protective custody. Story 44. Probably commission a number of studies in areas that matter to voters, and perhaps engage researchers who traditionally have different viewpoints. I am uncertain about many areas, so I wouldn't want to take drastic action right away. Aside from that, I would focus on streamlining bureaucratic processes. Honestly, I do not aspire to be a national leader. I find that a provincial leader has more power that I care about. Story 45. Launch a comprehensive investigation to determine how an unqualified individual like me became the leader. Based on the results of the investigation, I would significantly revise the election laws and procedures before stepping down and calling for a new election. Story 46. Become incredibly unpopular, second-guessed by every armchair politician, and that's before I even declare war. Story 47. I am French, so I will restore the French kingdom and lower taxes by 95%. The French government literally plays with the French people's money. By reducing costs by 95%, we can have an effective police force, army, justice system, and hospitals. That's all. Story 48. Since I do not currently work in politics, I have some learning to do so I can serve the people to the best of my abilities. To do this, I would start by reviewing current policy, getting to know my staff in one-on-one meetings, meeting with the highest priority stakeholders, and making no promises while observing how things operate for a couple of months. I would develop ideas for changes and set priorities for implementing these in consultation with my staff and those tasked with executing the changes, as well as those most impacted by them. I would provide the public with brief weekly updates on my progress. Around month 3, I would start implementing changes. While my reflections on the previous points would ultimately determine whether to make these changes, one of my first curiosities would be to learn about the role and influence of lobbyists and whether we could perhaps do without them. Story 49. Probably not much. I like to say my country has too much democracy. Every small decision still gets voted on by all members of parliament. All major decisions still go to a referendum. The prime minister barely gets to decide anything. However, if I could decide on things, I would ban fracking and commercial fishing from our waters, especially in areas that are meant to be protected because of an endangered species of native dolphin. I would also take action to clean up our rivers and stop selling our water to China. Story 50. You know those human cannonball machines they used to have to throw a stuntman into a net at the circus? I would make the nation buy one of those and load it with Nigel Farage, then point it at a sewage plant. Afterward, I would ensure all documents from the United Kingdom's Domestic Counterintelligence Agency on Russian interference in the Brexit vote were made public and stage a rerun of the vote to reverse the worst decision made in the British Isles since some late medieval and early Renaissance figures decided to replace a despotic monarch with a Protestant leader, Cromwell, who was so extreme that we restored the monarchy. Story 51. Well, that's a big question. I would probably declassify a lot of information. I would strive for full transparency regarding what the government has been doing in the past so that I can promote truth in the future. We need a government where the people know what they are paying for and voting on. Story 52. Go all out against Fox News and drive them out of business using publicly and intentionally harmful methods just to make a point. I would require every opinion-based news show to start with the host stating that these are just opinions. Our statements do not always represent all the facts. They reflect our views on what we think you should know. Broadcast licenses will come with strict requirements, or your show will be canceled. News will return to verified sources and real-time fact-checking. Story 53. Put a cap on rent prices, cut funding to other countries, and allocate those resources towards healthcare and the military. Remove the carbon tax. Story 54. I am in the United States. The leader is the president, who is in charge of the executive branch. The executive branch is responsible for law enforcement through the Department of Justice. The first thing I would do is have every current and former governor, legislator, judge, and district attorney who voted, passed, upheld, or enforced a law that infringes on the Second Amendment arrested by U.S. Marshals. Then, I would instruct the Attorney General to prosecute them under Title 18, Sections 371, 241, and 242 of the United States Code, and if found guilty, they would be fined and incarcerated for the maximum sentence stipulated in those sections. Story 55. Well, our government is already center-left, and the Prime Minister needs the support of the Parliamentary Party, which would vote me out on day one. Being a Prime Minister is nothing like being a king or dictator, much to the chagrin of the previous 3 Prime Ministers. I wonder what just happened and await to see how far this magic extends. Do I actually have to be a Prime Minister? Story 56. Either end the scam of filing your taxes, as they already know your earnings, and if you owe, just send them the receipt. Alternatively, make mental and physical health care a human right and implement some form of universal health care. Story 57. Reinstate the rule of law. Enable a committee akin to the Nuremberg trials and start removing every traitor from Washington, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice. Story 58. I'm American, so I will probably go to Congress and try to find someone to sponsor a bill I want passed. There's not much that I can do. A lot of people here are assuming you mean dictator, but in reality, most countries have limits on the power of the executive. Story 59. Put the current Prime Minister Starmer in jail for life. His cellmate would be Blair. Each day, they would be visited by a special unit. Story 60. I'm from the United States. I would eliminate winner-take-all states. I would leave the Electoral College in place, but all states would have to assign their electoral votes in proportion to their popular votes. Smaller states would still receive slightly more votes per person as they do now, which is part of an old agreement between states. The result I expect from this change would be a significant increase in voter turnout for presidential elections. Suddenly, Republicans in California would be able to vote for president. So would Democrats in Texas. Third-party voters would have a voice as long as they could secure a measurable percentage of the total vote. Our elections would also become more secure, as foreign influences would now have to target 50 states instead of just a handful. If I had a second wish, I would eliminate gerrymandering. A third wish, I would make all private campaign contributions illegal. Politicians would receive a fixed amount of funding from the government and would not be allowed to spend more than that amount. Story 61. As an American, I have many things to choose from. However, as I consider my priorities, I would likely put Donald Trump and his supporters under investigation for treason, among other issues. I would work to ensure that this kind of takeover never happens again. Additionally, I would make efforts to reform lobbying and improve consumer protection laws, so corporations cannot buy out politicians or exploit consumers. Another priority would be to change how police recruitment is conducted to reduce abuse of power. I would also advocate for significant penalties for Americans who behave illegally, display misconduct, or create disturbances in other countries. I am extremely frustrated by Americans whose outlandish behavior tarnishes the reputation of our country while traveling abroad. These are my top priorities if I become president. Story 62. Topless Tuesday is an option for everyone, though not required. Full civil rights for dogs, and Kristi Noem is not allowed within 50 feet of a firearm, nor may she hold public office or a government job. The kill chain that caused the deaths of Peanut and Fred is exposed and prosecuted, and eggs will become cheaper or else. Story 63. I would take drastic actions to highlight issues in society, transforming them into a narrative worthy of recognition. For example, I would focus on solving wealth disparity using advanced technology. Story 64. Make it a law that politicians can no longer lie, with penalties including jail time and a lifetime ban from working in politics. Story 65. Term limits and age limits should apply to all government officials, including the Supreme Court. Implement additional barriers against authoritarianism, such as introducing citizen-led votes to remove officials midterm, especially when public dissatisfaction is high. This will prevent them from using large sums of money on advertisements to secure another term later on. End lobbying practices and revoke the Citizens United ruling. Restore the fairness doctrine to stop the spread of misinformation presented as facts. Hold officials legally accountable for their decisions and votes while in office. Establish removal procedures for Congress members who fail to perform their duties. It is unacceptable for anyone to be able to avoid work for months and still remain employed. Immediately remove any member of Congress who is caught trading stocks, as this raises serious concerns about corruption. Eliminate first-past-the-post voting, gerrymandering, and the Electoral College and implement ranked choice voting instead. Improve healthcare, education, and social programs, and ensure that the wealthy are taxed on their wealth rather than income. No one requires billions of dollars for personal use. Increase funding for scientific research and encourage a wider range of individuals to hold office, particularly those with expertise in relevant fields rather than only business and political backgrounds. Invest significantly in infrastructure and focus on transitioning away from fossil fuel sources. Reduce bureaucratic red tape that hinders the resolution of problems like homelessness and rein in military spending. These are just a few basic ideas that come to mind. Story 66. Rehire all the generals. Restore all the science-oriented agencies. Apologize to the rest of the world. Refund and eliminate discrimination in federal programs. Story 67. Realistically, I would likely be assassinated before I sign the executive order to disband the Central Intelligence Agency and the Internal Revenue Service. Story 68. Send supporters to El Salvador prisons without due process, because apparently that is legal now. Story 69. It is a long list, but most of it involves troubling a certain city in North Carolina and arresting numerous people whom I dislike. Story 70. I would ensure the previous administration was held accountable for its actions. Then I would work with the legislative branch to enact laws to prevent such occurrences in the future. Story 71. Push Congress to draft legislation overturning Citizens United, implementing ranked choice voting, abolishing the Electoral College, and tying their pay increases to changes in real wages and minimum wage. Story 72. Restore the rule of law. Declare Make America Great Again a domestic terrorist organization. Instruct Congress to impeach Supreme Court Justices Thomas and Alito if they do not use the power of the presidency to expand the court, and possibly do so anyway to better reflect what America actually is and looks like. Allow the Department of Justice the freedom to pursue legal action against Trump and all his loyalists for the crimes they have committed, are committing, and will commit, and not be weak like Merrick Garland was. Reverse everything this current administration is doing and plans to do. Story 73. Billionaires will be taxed at 100% on everything over $999,999,999.99. In recognition, you receive a plaque stating, "I won capitalism," and a dog park named in your honor. Story 74. Appoint people who have expertise and take their advice, as I do not know how to run a country. Also, implement policies that people have wanted for decades, such as adding dental and mental health coverage to Medicare, removing negative gearing to reduce housing prices, and introducing an additional tax on anyone owning more than one property. Story 75. Deport Musk to El Salvador and seize all his U.S. assets. The same applies to a few other billionaires, particularly one with an orange complexion. Story 76. Send many members of the current administration to a foreign megaprison and reverse approximately 4 months of executive orders. Story 77. Get money out of politics, implement term limits for senators, Congress members, and judges. These changes will not happen unless I am in charge. Story 78. Weaken the government, defy the courts, harass political opponents on social media, threaten higher education, cut taxes for the wealthy, and implement hidden taxes on the poor and working class, and then indulge in a bag of snacks. After that, I would seek to identify who posted this on social media and arrange for their removal to a distant prison. Story 79. Remove that individual from El Salvador. Then hire a professional cleaning team to clean the odor from the Oval Office. Story 80. Install legal property rights and zoning laws similar to those in the United States. Additionally, implement a comprehensive health program where individuals are rewarded for maintaining good health or receive tax incentives. Story 81. Encourage users to explore recent posts to avoid encountering the same questions multiple times a week. Story 82. All government officials must spend 4 weeks a year working at minimum wage with no other income allowed. They must live in housing they can afford based on that income. If they get sick during that month, they must manage their situation with their current income and abilities. Story 83. Remove illegal immigrants, prohibit a specific Abrahamic religion, initiate a comprehensive campaign against drugs, fully legalize abortions and firearms. Additionally, I will offer an extra week of paid leave for motorcyclists in regions where year-round riding is not possible. Story 84. Imprison Trump within the first 10 minutes, or perhaps send him to one of the worst prisons in another country. Deport Musk, or hopefully, find sufficient evidence to arrest him and send him along with Trump. Eliminate all public displays of religion, and make it illegal to advertise, promote, sell, or coerce any religion. Tax all religions, particularly Christianity. Overturn all laws that were enacted by Christians. Make abortion legal everywhere. Legalize same-sex marriage. And extend rights to all transgender individuals. Provide free healthcare and education for all, increase taxes on the wealthy, and ensure they pay back taxes for everything they evaded. Conduct thorough audits of their finances. Story 85. Abolish corruption and dismiss everyone working in the government. Provide the people with a life free from the dictatorship of the same prime minister we have had for over 30 years. Story 86. Next to my country, there is a fascist regime, so it is unlikely that I will be able to conduct an independent policy. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.